Now I'll be discussing anaerobic respiration, and immediately after that I will compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration. What is anaerobic respiration? Anaerobic respiration is the respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen. Respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen. You have two types of it. One is alcohol fermentation, and during alcohol fermentation, your glucose breaks down to give you ethanol and carbon dioxide, while energy is released. And the second type is lactic acid fermentation. During lactic acid fermentation, your glucose breaks down to give you lactic acid and energy is released. Note that your alcohol fermentation takes place in the yeast cell when oxygen is absent, while lactic acid fermentation takes place in your muscle cell when oxygen is absent. So anaerobic respiration is the respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen, and you have two types of it. One is alcohol fermentation, while the second is lactic acid fermentation. Now, alcohol fermentation. Before your glucose will undergo reaction to give you ethanol and carbon dioxide, your glucose first undergo glycolysis. That means glucose change to what? Pyruvic acid. Now the details of glycolysis, you can watch my video on glycolysis to have better understanding of the processes that are involved in glycolysis. And during glycolysis, your glucose is converted to pyruvate. You can also say pyruvic acid. Now note that 1 mole of glucose will generate 2 moles of pyruvate. That's during glycolysis. Now, immediately after you generate your pyruvate during glycolysis, in the absence of oxygen in a yeast cell, the pyruvate will undergo reduction to give you ethanol. The pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound, will undergo reduction to give you ethanol. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon compound. It will lose a carbon in form of carbon dioxide, and the enzyme that is responsible for removing this carbon is known as pyruvate decarboxylase. You generate your ethanol. Ethanol is a 2-carbon compound. The ethanol is further reduced to ethanol, and the hydrogen that is used to reduce your ethanol to ethanol, the hydrogen comes from NADH that is generated during glycolysis. That is reduced NAD. You can also refer to as NADH. Now the hydrogen from this reduced NAD is added to your ethanol. The hydrogen comes and is added to your ethanol. Once it's added to your ethanol, it forms ethanol, and the enzyme that is responsible for that process is known as ethanol dehydrogenase. So note that during respiration in yeast, that is respiration in the absence of oxygen, your glucose is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide, while energy is generated. And this process of alcohol fermentation is very important in our industries and even in our baking industries. Now, in companies or industries that produces brewery or that produces alcohol fermentation is very important, because they use that system to generate their beer or their wine or other alcoholic drink. The alcohol or the ethanol is a byproduct of alcohol fermentation. Also, in baking industries, industries that bake bread or meat pie or egg roll, etc., they also make use of yeast. That yeast will undergo alcohol fermentation, and during that process carbon dioxide is generated, and that yeast allow your bread or your dough to rise. That is very important. So alcohol fermentation has application in industries that produces wine, as well as industries that bakes the food that we eat. Now, the second type of anaerobic respiration is the respiration that takes place in our muscle cell, that is in the absence of oxygen, and that is can also be referred to as lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation. Now, after your glucose has been converted to pyruvate, at this point, your glucose has been converted to your pyruvate. That's the process known as glycolysis. And I said earlier that 1 mole of glucose will generate 2 moles of pyruvate. Now, during that process, know that NADH is also produced. That's during glycolysis. Also, ATP is generated. Now, after your pyruvate is generated in your muscle cell during respiration in the absence of oxygen, the pyruvate will in turn pick the hydrogen from your reduced NAD. So the hydrogen in your reduced NAD is picked by pyruvate to convert it to lactate, or you can also refer to it as lactic acid. And the enzyme responsible for that is known as lactate dehydrogenase. Now, note that your muscle cell cannot store excess lactic acid or excess lactate. Therefore, the lactate will undergo oxidation in the presence of oxygen to give you carbon dioxide and water, or the lactate will be converted to glycogen in your liver cell. So note that anaerobic respiration is of two types. You have the lactic acid fermentation and also alcohol fermentation. Go on to discuss the differences between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. In aerobic respiration, oxygen is present, while anaerobic respiration, oxygen is absent. In aerobic respiration, hydrogen is added to the carrier. You can still remember the electron transport chain that are discussed during oxidative phosphorylation in aerobic respiration. Hydrogen is added to the carrier. In anaerobic respiration, hydrogen is added back to your pyruvate. You can see that in what I just discussed now. Also, in aerobic respiration, more energy is produced, while in anaerobic, less energy is produced. Under aerobic, NADH is produced, FADH2 is also produced, but for anaerobic, only NADH is produced, and it is few compared to that of aerobic. Under aerobic respiration, water and carbon dioxide are the byproducts that you have, while in anaerobic, carbon dioxide is the only byproduct that you have. Aerobic respiration takes place in one pathway, while anaerobic takes place in two pathways. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe on my other videos as well.